Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson, and oh my goodness, do I have a special guest for y'all today. Tim Whitaker, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me. It means a lot. And I'm so sorry that off air I guessed your name wrong twice. I was like, is it Leah or Leia? And you're like, it's Lee. I'm like, oh, of course, the one option I didn't suggest. So I apologize. I want your audience to know that.
Follow the leader and Lee.
Yes,
it's a play on words. Yes,
I love it.
absolutely.
It's
but
Thanks
blame
for
my
having
mother.
me.
That's 5 letters to a pronounced game.
That's funny.
Folks, I really am humbled and touched that Tim Whitaker came to the studio today. He's the founder and the creative director of the new Evangelicals. He is an ex-evangelical faith believer, and he has developed over the last 5 years a following that is not just deconstruction and pointing out the flaws like online, which I feel like I do. I'm constantly going after political officials, but he has also created a community, a place for others to come and deconstruct, to find one another, answer the hard questions, and lean into a new perspective on their faith. He's amassed quite a following. I mean, between all platforms, your podcast, your co-creator on your podcast is April Ajoy with her Star Spangled Banner. So again, I want to thank you for coming to the studio for such a small creator when you're so big. You and Melinda Hale, who was on here a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Absolutely. Every creator matters, especially in this war against Christian fascism. So, I think that part of the capitalist mindset for us is that bigger is better or more is better. But honestly, I think qualified is the best. And considering that you have your master's in theology, voices like yours, credible voices, are really needed now more than ever. So absolutely happy to come on. I'm honored, and keep going. It's important work.
Back at you. Folks, Tim comes from us out of New Jersey. And is that where you have been all your life? Are you a New Jersey boy?
Yep, born and raised.
Well, folks, why I wanted Tim to come on today was to talk about the new Evangelicals and their mission, and to talk about deconstruction. But really, we talk a lot about Christian nationalism in the United States at large, in the military, in all these different groups. And I was very curious to hear from a man who grew up in this. I wanted to hear about masculinity, about manhood, maleness. Why are people like Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth so appealing when so many of us are horrified? So just kind of walk us through how you were raised. What was your faith like in your New Jersey community?
Yeah, so New Jersey is a very liberal state overall, but I was still raised in a very conservative, evangelical kind of world and bubble. I was homeschooled for 9 years, went to a small private school where I graduated top 5 in my class out of 6, so really stepping up there on the educational level. But yeah, just kind of grew up in this very insular, white evangelical bubble. And I think the masculinity part is really important because I don't think enough people understand how you're kind of primed to, I'm not going to say look up to guys like Trump, because you're not in the general sense, but you're definitely primed to become people like Pete Hegseth. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the abusive side or his alcoholism, not that, but the idea of like a man is ready for battle. A man takes on the armor of God, fights for a beauty to rescue. There's a very infamous book in these spaces called Wild at Heart that every person I knew, including myself, every young boy and man read by a guy named John Eldridge. And, the general thesis is that men are created to be out in the wild and that society is domesticating them. And look, I would say that, like anything, you can find elements of truth to that. Like, hey, there is maybe some things that we can think about as a society, right? For sure. But it's tied into this idea of a man wants an adventure and a beauty to rescue, and women don't want to be the adventure. They want to be brought on an adventure. It's very like, this like romanticizing of like life and grandioseness. And so there are books like that you're reading. You're reading books about lust and the war for your heart when it comes to issues like that. And you're also really into like battle imagery. This is reinforced in the songs that you sing. There's a song by Elevation Worship from back in the day that says, "Our God's a mighty warrior." That kind of language is reinforced kind of everywhere you go. Even as a a child, I learned the song that I'm in the Lord's army. I can still sing it by heart, the whole thing. So this image of battle and war, it's very normalized in this particular expression of Christian thought. And men are kind of taught that they have to be in control of themselves, that they can't give into lust, that they have to, be a man who is going to be the provider in the family, a man who is ready to be courageous and take on the war of the world. And so Trump, in some ways, blows that narrative away because he is an adulterer, right? He is an abuser. He's not in control. At the same time, evangelicalism has been looking for a strongman type person to stick it to the mainstream media and the libs, right? And so it wasn't that hard for white evangelicalism and the leaders in that movement, all of the pastors and stuff, to kind of rewrite and overlook some of those flaws by saying, well, Trump is the strongman that we all need. And maybe one other angle I'll offer here, then we can riff on whatever you want. And this part, I think, was really underreported. Trump is popular with white evangelicals because Trump really is like an embodied image of the kind of God that they worship. The kind of God that evangelicalism worships is a God of vengeance, a God who will destroy all of his enemies, a God who will put you in hell forever if you don't say the right words and go to the right team. A God who is harsh on people that this God doesn't like. And so it's not hard for me to see why there's an allure here, because they worship a very wrathful God, a God of wrath and judgment, unless you're on the right team. And that's how Trump operates, right? As long as you're in Trump's good graces, things can be great. The second you even critique Trump, right, it's wrath and judgment and you're kicked out. Same thing with the evangelical God. So there's a lot of connections, in my opinion.
Wow. No, that is a great connection, because I think about that too. I read Pamela Cooper White's The Psychology of Christian Nationalism, cool. And it's why people are drawn in. Are you familiar with this book? Have you? Okay.
No, I need to get it. It sounds great.
Yeah, it's super cool. It looks into I'm sure it would probably be weird for someone like you to read it, because you're like, these are exactly how we recruited people, or you know what I mean? It's it's very yeah. Oh my God. But it really goes into, but one of the things it talks about is the use of, so you might have the older older church leader, and he's a man, he's got a beard, he's probably got gray or white hair, and he wears a suit. But then there's also the younger guy that is fit and super active and talks about his hot wife and
yes, super hot wife.
Right. But this was almost it talked how these two leaders are typically in churches, but the older one is for maybe you might see them both depending on how big the church is or what the needs are, but very much this male patriarch that is leading, and they might dress a certain way to come off as a different, maybe the younger male doesn't wear the suit or the tie, and he's chill, right? He's doing it in jeans. But all of this around masculinity, this patriarchal, and not able to question, because that also came up as what do you do with those church leaders when they get a little grabby with women in the church, or can you question these men in the church? Have you, either through your community or just in your network, have you heard of these stories of pushing back against individual church leaders or questioning?
Well, yeah, when that happens, that's pretty standard. Reflecting back on my own upbringing, and by the way, white evangelicalism is kind of nuanced, right? It's not monolithic in its expression or even the culture, the subcultures inside of it. But in my experience, I remember one of the pastors was confronted over his anger issues and essentially ended up splitting the church down the middle and taking half the church with him to a new space. Church splits growing up for me were kind of a thing over sometimes, minor things oh, there's drums at the church, we're out of here. As a former professional drummer who started in the church, in a church that only had a piano and no modern instruments, that was really divisive when I started playing drums in the church, So yeah, when it comes to the leadership, maybe that's another connection to draw from, right? There is a very hierarchical, the pastor is the one in charge. You don't question the pastor because he's been chosen by God to lead this congregation. How dare you? And it does create a systemic issue of abuse and cover up of the abuse, right? I think it's fair to say that humans anywhere can do bad things, right? This is not exclusive to white evangelicalism. The problem with white evangelicalism is that it's largely unaccountable when those bad things happen. Right? When the pastor is actually abusive or narcissistic, for example, Mark Driscoll, a very famous example of this, right? Mark Driscoll blows up on the scene. He's this firebrand type of personality, claims to read a book a day, yada, yada, yada. Turns out the church that he built back in the day, Mars Hill, imploded because he had real anger issues and was very cruel and very rude, and some argue narcissistic. And his reaction was to essentially blow the church up, not submit to any kind of accountability by his elder board. He left that church, and then Robert Morris, who is a pastor of what was the world's largest, the U.S.'s largest megachurch, who was on Trump's Faith Council, who is now in prison for molesting a 12-year-old when he was 21 back in the 80s. That Robert Morris, back in the day, brings Mark Driscoll in front of his entire church and says, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, we have two options. We could crucify Mark, or we could trust the one that's already been crucified. That's kind of how he phrases it, right? So really articulate way of saying that, but essentially giving Mark a pass. And now Mark Driscoll has over 1 million followers on social media. He's a huge name in the Turning Point USA world, but he's a narcissist. He has a mountain of bodies behind him, to the point there was an entire podcast series done around Mark. It's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It was pushed by Christianity Today. I think it's still on the podcast charts 3 or 4 years later. And it documented the entire story. That did not stop Mark or people around Mark from bringing him into these spaces to platform him. That's a great example of how this space can operate very often.
No, I'm glad you bring up Mark Driscoll, because I want to talk to you about it. And that makes sense. Like, you're talking about the unaccountability, the lack of accountability. You're talking about these male hierarchical leaders, masculinity main. I'm really glad you made that separation, that Trump might seem like the more powerful God, the wealth, the abundance of that he's portraying, the harshness, like you were talking about, derived from the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. And then Hegseth would be his like younger model, like we were just saying, the two church.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
But I like that you brought up Mark Driscoll, because I wanted to circle back to your homeschooling, because from what I've gathered, a lot of homeschool communities in rejection of secular public school academics have gone down the homeschool route, and they're getting their material from a lot of the same sources. So like Mark Driscoll, focus on the family.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, like, I have yet to find, can you just, if you can remember, can you talk about some of those homeschool or Sunday school, like, just what were y'all learning?
Boy, I mean, how long do you got?
Sorry.
No, so here's the TLDR on the like homeschooling network, right? By the way, a fun fact: the original homeschooling movement started by a secular borderline Marxist in America who thought that public schools were oppressive to children and wanted to liberate them from the oppression. Which, by the way, as someone who has kids in public school, 2 boys, I'm like, I kind of get that. I don't know if it's really healthy to have kids sitting down for 8 hours a day, right? Whatever. But that got co-opted in like the 80s, 90s. There's a movement, a big homeschooling movement that actually coincides with integration. It's amazing how you can trace so much of the modern evangelical movement to the days of integration. Jerry Falwell, founder of the Moral Majority, was not politicized over abortion. He was politicized over integration, school integration. And so the homeschooling movement and the private school movement explodes when the schools become integrated. That's when the Christian right kind of takes over the homeschooling world. Now, I say all this because I was homeschooled, and no shade to my parents. My parents had their convictions, but I had a pretty healthy homeschooling childhood. And my mom, when she realized that she couldn't teach me certain things, it was beyond her knowledge, she put me in school to get more education. So props to her, right? And also, I will say, as a musician, I was 11, drumming became part of my daily curriculum. And I also had ADHD as a kid, no doubt about it. So I was able to run around the table and get back to doing my work, right? It was a customizable routine for me that worked really well. However, the broader waters I was swimming in, the curriculum I was swimming in, comes from that fundamentalist way of thinking. So there are curriculums like Bob Jones University, which, by the way, Bob Jones University, for your audience, in the 70s and 80s, refused to allow interracial dating on their campus. And when the IRS said, hey, Bob Jones, we're going to essentially erase or take away your tax-exempt status, Bob Jones was so convicted in their beliefs that they said, no, we're going to sue you because you're infringing on our religious liberty to practice our faith freely. Does that sound familiar? And they lost the case, and they overturned their interracial dating ban in the year 2000. Okay, I was learning from that school curriculum at one point. There's also PACES, that's another one, and then there's the big one, Abeka. And this world of curriculum kind of comes from like a couple different sources, but it's all the same stuff. I wasn't really taught about slavery in my homeschooling curriculum. You know, like that kind of stuff isn't really taught. And I mean, you could argue that even in public schools, it's not taught enough, but I was given a real whitewashed version of that, you know. So yeah, the homeschooling world is built. It preys on the fears of parents that if your kid goes to public school, not only will they be corrupted because other students are there and they're automatically going to be a bad influence, but the teachers are indoctrinating your kid into what we would now say is wokeism, right? Oh, gender affirming stuff, gay stuff. Oh, it's all indoctrination. We have to keep our kids safe from the world. So let's homeschool them and teach them our values. That's the general idea of what we're talking about here. It's very effective for the religious right because so much of what is going on in that world is based on fear. It's not based on curiosity, right? It's not an approach of, hey, well, if our child has that moment where maybe they do meet a friend who's a bad influence, we can walk them through that and kind of come alongside them. It's not that. It's protection from that, which ultimately, I to a degree, I can understand, but also you're kind of delaying the inevitable. Because what happens when that kid turns 18 and hits the quote-unquote world for the first time? Now they're not equipped for any of it because you've sheltered them so much. They're curious, but with no parameters or no wisdom, and they're set up for disaster.
No, and that's kind of, I like that you said at the very beginning, is that there's these kernels of truth in there. Like I've read Pete Hegseth's books quite a bit, and there's some, I'm really thankful that I have a support group and I'm so grounded in my values, because there are some times I was like, damn, he's got a point.
Right.
But like, yeah, our public school system is it does need some, it needs to be addressed. And I understand all these parts that contribute, but then it's an ideological thing. And it's not just like, oh, the structures are broken and we need to repair it, or it's just like sweeping in a totally new way. And I majored, so I was an international relations major in college, and I was also in the second program called Core Texts and Ideas under the Thomas Jefferson program. And it was essentially classical liberalism. And it was ancient Greece and Roman Republic, and then an Enlightenment and the Bible, and then American Revolution. And then my seminary taught liberation theology or progressive theology. And so, like, it's just a wild thing, and I don't, and I like to talk to y'all too, but like, have a head full of, you know, like John Locke or classical Christian liberalism, and then also I've got bell hooks now, right? And now they're arguing.
Right.
And because they're just different ways of seeing and viewing the world, and one is very much based on a hierarchy, and one is much more based on like a communal circle, and they're clashing. So it's tell me about your so you're pretty much in this world, and you go into being an evangelical pastor?
No, I was always on the volunteer level in church world, but I was really every pastor's like dream volunteer, because I was always all in. So I helped plant their churches, I built their worship teams, like I was always there. But I kind of saw early on, I even did some education for ministry, but I saw early on, I don't have the gift, we'll call it, of pastoring. You know, I am pretty blunt. I'm from New Jersey. At some point, I'm going to say something the wrong way. And frankly, I saw, even in those spaces, I saw the burden on pastors, like, be perfect. And I was like, hell no. Like, it's never going to be me. As a human, I don't do well trying to be contained into like boxes and systems. You know, I'm just not. It's a Jersey thing. I'm close to Philly. It's a Philly thing. It's my attitude. I'm a drummer. So I knew that being a pastor on staff somewhere probably wouldn't be my thing. So I just said, hey, I'll just be a great number two in terms of volunteering. So that's more of my background.
That's awesome. Well, and that's very true. That the burden of being a pastor, just and particularly like so many churches, especially that are congregationalist or like independent, the pastor has very little power too, like in trying to change things. At least in my denomination, Disciples of Christ, like it's very church board driven, and.
Yes. As someone who started a nonprofit by accident, a small one, I've had enough of that in my life. Which, by the way, I get and I understand. I respect it. But, like, it gets to a point where you're like, guys, do we have to have a meeting over this? It's so inconsequential. But you need those things. Like, they're important, So I definitely get it. But I'm also kind of impatient.
Oh, yeah. And I went into ministry years ago, and I also felt that I did not like congregational ministry. I thought like maybe I could do some part-time hospital chaplaincy or some sort of like that work, but wound up going into military chaplaincy, and that's where like it was like I woke up or something. I had been on just like my little trajectory, like, oh, I'm gonna go be this reservist chaplain, I'm gonna go help the soldiers, and then I get in there and they're like, we don't think that women should be here, and I was like, what?
Sounds about right.
I thought you were joking.
You're right. Yeah, fact check true. That's the problem.
Very true. Mm-hmm. And I just I saw it, and I went through a phase where I was like, I blame myself. Well, this is what I get for joining. I was like 2017, 2018. I need to go back, but like that was Trump's first term. Like, what are you thinking doing? And then I don't know. I was just a young American who wanted to go serve my country and spiritually care for folks, and didn't realize how intense the politicization had become.
Yep.
And it's a really interesting dynamic on the military chaplain side, because Southern Baptist or non-denominational evangelicals vastly are represented in the military. And a lot of that has to do with the Vietnam War and just post 1960s distrust on progressive mainline side of it. Like a lot of progressive mainline churches saw Vietnam War footage and they're like, you know what? I don't think we want to emphasize war theology in ministry. Yeah. We're going to focus on hospital, prison, and like domestic chaplaincy if we leave the church, kind of thing. And so for quote unquote progressive, that's why they aren't sending a lot of folks from their own faith into military, because it's just not what they emphasize. And then so you got that, but meanwhile you got people getting excited by this is now after the after 1960s and Vietnam War, you're going pretty quickly into Reagan and then into the 90s. It's just like you see also all these reasons for faith to get into the fight, and you start to see the evangelical chaplains really take ownership of it. And I think it's fascinating. I talked to an evangelical military chaplain yesterday, and he watched that change in the 90s. So he was like, I remember that there was a lot of progressive mainline folks calling the shots, and then right around the 90s it flipped and started growing, and then 2001 9/11 just skyrocketed.
Yeah, I believe that.
And so it's like a fascinating thing for us. I don't know how old you are, but I know that you were probably young when 9/11 happened. And
yeah, I'm 37, so I was at maybe 10 or 11 now, something like that. Yeah.
But old enough to process and understand
Definitely.
What the kid.
Well, and my uncle was in the towers. I mean, I live in New Jersey. He worked in the towers. He got out okay, but I was at my aunt's house and she was freaking out because we didn't know if he was alive, and he showed up later, because this is the world before real cell phone service, and it was a very emotional moment. That part is seared into my memory forever, so yeah, absolutely. Very personal.
So I'm so sorry that happened to you, and yeah, I mean, that it is so I forget this. I was in Texas, so it was a New York thing, but it's that 9/11 was so communal and hit that entire region community so hard. So I'm glad he got out safely, but yeah. And but building on that 9/11 piece, was that a very clear message you received? Was that U.S. and George Bush and we're going to war? Or what was that? What was the sentiment?
Hell yeah,
if you
brother.
Remember.
I mean, you have to imagine if you're growing up in this world, chances are you're listening to talk radio. Chances are you listen to Rush Limbaugh pretty often because your parents listen to Rush Limbaugh. So you hear Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, whoever else. Abso-freaking-lutely, like the war on terror, right? That was reinforced by Sean Hannity and Rush and Michael Savage and all the other names daily. And I remember them. I remember vividly Sean Hannity would bring on imams and just get them into like these corners where they had to like denounce the craziest stuff or else they were painted as a radical. Like, it was just always like just tricks that Sean would use to get people into really awkward positions on the radio. And I remember him talking about radical Islam and extremism and how there's these sleeper cells everywhere. I mean, I was taught and just kind of picked up, they say culture is caught more than taught. I just picked up this notion that like Muslims are probably extremists, like generally speaking, they are just not good people. And they're extreme and they want to kill Americans. And that war on terror was, in my tradition, was seen as kind of a holy war. Like God's on our side. We have to eradicate this evil. This is terror, right? And it's so interesting as I got older and, deconstructed and kind of read more widely, where I was like, while certainly, I mean, like, terrorism is bad, I think that we're also terrorists sometimes as the world's biggest empire and exporter of arms. Like, interesting, because you're just taught that America's always a good guy. Like, we're on the side of God. Everyone else is on the side of Satan. We have an obligation to carry out the will of God as a nation, right? So yes, 9/11 was a huge rallying cry, personally, to become very extreme in my faith, to become all in on Jesus, and also to realize that there are bad people out there that look like that largely look like they're Middle Eastern and worship Allah, which is just the Arabic word for God. But that's not what you're taught then. You're just taught that these are just bad, evil people who hate you.
Well, and and what's interesting is I also noticed a divide around George Bush's response. Is like there were people that were absolutely like that. George W. Bush's response was not enough, and it like pushed some folks further into their evangelicalism. Like, and is what kind of I've gathered. I mean, there were some that herald him as a hero, but then also there's the emergence of the Tea Party, and then there was Obama, and there's all this. But it's just like and one of the things and I don't want to spend too much time on Obama because I want to go back to masculinity, but one of the things Can
I interrupt you really quick?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
I'm starting to cut you off. A really key point that needs to be made while we're on 9/11 briefly. And I can give you this clip that you can put in this episode if you want. So Doug Wilson, who disciples Pete Hegseth, okay? I have a clip of Doug Wilson speaking maybe a week after 9/11 where he says, and I'll give you the audio after this we record so you have proof. He says that the worst thing about 9/11 was not the towers being hit. It was the ecumenical worship service that happened in Congress, where a Buddhist and a Hindu and a lady preacher was there, and how even the representative of evangelicalism gave the stamp of approval. He really said that. That's the man discipling Pete Hegseth today. So that extremism was right there all along. But even those comments by Doug Wilson were not enough for evangelicals to kick him out of their tribe. I just wanted to highlight that while we were on that topic.
No, and that is I'm thank you for bringing that up, because those are great strands. Like, to keep this whole string has been going.
Yes. Yes.
I recently saw that with the announcement of the chaplain corps great again by Hegseth, I saw that the religious I can't remember the official title, but Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas runs it. And it's this Council on Religious Freedom or something like that. And they were praising Hegseth for the Make the Chaplain Corps Great Again. And in the essay, or in this bit, it talks about Dave Barton and how Dave Barton's on this council and supports Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. And like, it was like all the names were in this. And this was a public statement. Again, I can send this and post a screenshot for my audience, but Dan Barton, for my viewers, is a historiographer, which is not the same as a historian. A historiographer is someone who likes to embellish, like maybe add some things that are creative.
You're putting it so kindly. I mean, he's a propagandist, is what I would say. But yes, sure, he's adding creative retellings of history that just happen to fit a certain narrative, you know.
Yeah. And these people, to your point, these people have been here all along, and now like they are like emerging at like the right hand of Pete Hegseth or the right hand of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
Right.
And Dave Barton's books, folks, have been disseminated to military academies all across the country. He's been pulled off shelves. Literally, his publisher retracted his book because it was terrible. Like there was no.
I'm pretty sure he was an accountant first. I think those are like his credentials. As he went to school, I'm looking it up really quick. I'm trying to look. He was employed as a teacher of math and science in a small Christian school. Like that's who this guy is. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in religious education from Oral Roberts University. That's a huge Christian like evangelical think tank. There's no credentials at all for this man to be a historian of any kind, and yet he's paraded at Turning Point USA. His books are widely written. That's a great example of the kind of revisionist history and mythology that the white evangelical space creates, which is why Trump fits so well into it. Sorry to cut you off there.
Absolutely. When that you didn't, because that circles right back to masculinity and manhood. As someone who has developed this community, again with Melinda Hale through the New Evangelicals, what have you seen that men have been struggling with as they deconstruct?
That's a good question. I'm going to be very honest with you, Lee, about that, because I've been thinking about this in particular, because I get the double-edged sword that this is, right? On one hand, a lot of us are coming out of a particularly white male-dominated space where men call the shots, men give the attention, men are centered, right? I understand the need to decenter men like that. I understand the need for, people like me to just sit and listen from other voices, right? I am all about that. At the same time, too, I think that as a man, there are times where I'm like, am I allowed to admit that I every now and then will smoke a cigar and eat a steak without it being called inherently toxic? Because I know that Doug Wilson does that, but I also like steak and cigars sometimes, Or is there a way where I can be with guys and talk about stuff that we think about as guys without it maybe coming across as the boys club, right? Is there space for me to say that as a white man, I still struggle with mental health sometimes, or I have my own doubts or fears, or sometimes life is tough for me without being told that, check my privilege at the door because I'm still a human being, right? And again, I'm giving kind of a maybe an oversimplistic explanation, but I think about both of those things. And I think about men who are deconstructing what we need is two things. One, I think that we have to be able to reclaim community out of the unhealthy ways that it was given to us. I think that that's really important for us as humans, but I think for men right now, especially given that our culture really teaches this really unhealthy, the individual man who's a lone wolf kind of vibe. It's so bad. Like I'm going to tell you something. In my marriage, I am the emotional spaghetti brain guy. My wife is not that way at all. I'm an emotional ball of all the feelings, right? I want people in my life. I want to hang out with guys. I want to be in community. So I think that we have to kind of reclaim that because of what both secular culture and evangelicalism has kind of taught us about what it means to be a man. And also I think that we have to be able to model what a healthy masculinity looks like. That might be, it might come across kind of bro-evangelical, so to speak, but it's rooted in equality. It's rooted in humanization. It's rooted in fighting for the rights of our trans neighbors, right? But it might look a little rah-rah, but it's rooted in these values, right, of equality and equity, etc., anti-racism, decolonization. So I think that's kind of like what needs to happen. And like I said, I get both sides of it. I get the double-edged sword that this could be, which is why I think those things should happen mostly offline. With maybe a podcast or two that are designed to reach men with a better way forward, so to speak, right? That lets them keep who they are, just, who they are as guys, but rooted in these values that are not patriarchy, that are not misogynistic, that are not hateful, that are not domineering, etc.
And I think that's I think that's a great point on when like there is one way to be a man, and then you realize that that way has been, or a female for that matter, because I'm sure women are.
Totally.
I know women are deconstructing the whole thing too, but
Yes, exactly.
like it's and that's almost like the heartbreaking part is it does take the sacred man, it does take the sacred masculine, sacred malehood, and then amplifies it to become toxic. But of course, like smoking cigars and eating steak, hunting and smoking tobacco, that's as old as time. Like, right. Like Doug Wilson does not have the monopoly on being a
right.
dude. And
right. I'm kind of mad at him for doing this. Right. Like I'm not sure if you've seen like his clips. He does this thing called No Quarter November, and his thesis is, look, guys, 11 months out of the year, I'm just this nice old grandpa type. But once a year, 1 month out of the year, I go just scorched earth, right? That's his whole vibe. And he does these little trailers for him where he has a flamethrower and something's on fire and he's burning something. I'm like, you know what, Doug Wilson? Can I curse on your podcast?
Yeah.
I'm like, Doug Wilson, damn you. Because a flamethrower would be pretty freaking cool. But now if I do that, I'm going to look like freaking Doug Wilson and be seen as like, this bro. When in reality, I'm like, I don't know. That's kind of a cool concept. Like setting something on fire could be fun. But I don't mean it in Doug Wilson's world of like this like faux alpha male masculinity. It just looks like it's fun to do. So there are definitely times where I'm like, these men have ruined even just fun things that I think are innocently just a fun time because they're attached to this like pseudo masculinity. I rule my house. I'm the king of my castle. My wife is just submits and all they do is make babies. Like, no, none of that is attached for me when I say, I would love to wear a flamethrower and set something on fire. That would be fun as hell.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So
hey,
power,
I think there is a thing, a venue in Vegas that does that. You and your team can like go and shoot grenades at like cars that were pulled from junk lots and stuff.
Right.
Sponsor us. Sponsor us right now.
That would be so like crushing something would be fun. Right. So I think that I'm at the point in my life where I'm starting to kind of like be okay with the fact that I like things that might be stereotypical male, but they're not attached to the values that I learned in evangelicalism or even in secular culture. Right. And so I'm kind of learning how to thread that needle personally.
And I think that's beautiful. I mean, like, there's also the other side of all of this energy and this feeling of, the dominance, the totality. On the other side of it, there is, I mean, like, the music that has come out of the Christian church, the evangelical church, much better than hymns, what I grew up with. We've got, like, I mean, a lot of these churches do significant work for their local communities. I know teachers of private Christian fundamentalist schools, and those schools also offer so much medical help to, vulnerable. And so there's so much, there's community, there's feeling, there's a lot to be, again, attracted by.
Yeah.
And then very quickly it turns into something like this. Like,
oh, Jesus. So, yes.
Like, it's just... So I know that you have to hop off soon. Can you share with us what's going on for the new evangelicals and for yourself or anything else you got going for people who wanted to learn more?
Well, so the TLDR is that I started the new evangelicals in December of 2020 completely by accident. I was just some rando dude in South Jersey who had a lot of questions and had this thought about the new evangelicals. No one had the name, so I grabbed it on Instagram and just started asking questions, and it blew up into this thing. Like, it became this nonprofit. It evolved. I'm like so proud of what I've done, but also about a year and a half ago, I realized that like where I'm heading long term, I think I'm kind of getting burnt out of being like in charge of this thing. Also, I think I'm just limited in my skill set for organizational leadership. And so Melinda Hale, who was on our board, took over as ED last summer, and it's been like amazing. It's been so good to watch what she's done with the organization, how she's evolved it, all the resources that we offer now. We have our own community space called T&E Connect. So right now, we actually announced this publicly so I can say it. I'm transitioning away from the creative director creative director role, and I'm shifting to an independent contractor position where I'll still host the New Evangelicals podcast and the Tim and April show and do creative stuff for the org as needed. But I'm kind of developing my own, it's called Tim Whitaker Speaks, platform that I've been focusing on more and more. So it's been a really cool transition. It's been really great to hand something off that I built, which I never thought I had in me. And it's even cooler to watch Melinda and Rebecca Thomas, our board president, really start to grow the organization in ways that it's always needed, but in ways that I just didn't have the talent to do, frankly. I'm much better yapping on a microphone. I'm much better getting passionate and talking about Christian nationalism and responding to all the fundamentalists. I love that work. I don't like executive director work. I don't like the fundraising part. I don't like the organizational part. I don't like any of it. So it's been really cool with that transition. And I think for some people maybe listening who grew up in church world, whenever there's a change of leadership, you're just kind of conditioned to believe that something must have went wrong. Like, oh, what happened? Like, what's the tea? Like, what are they fighting? And in this case, it's like, no, not at all. The organization evolved. I evolved. I handed it off, and now it's growing again, and it's great. It's great. So it's been a lot of fun to watch the growth of the organization over the past year, and I really love what I'm doing as an individual creator under Tim Whitaker Speaks. So it's really a match made in heaven.
Oh, I love that for you. Oh, that's fantastic. Can you leave our listeners with some parting words or some just anything you want them to think about?
Well, who are your listeners? Who do you think they are?
There's a mix of military, clergy, a lot of academic, and it's a lot of women. And
cool.
So
all the things I am not.
So yeah, I guess there's a lot of folks that just like, I guess for those audiences, like, I like what you're doing. I'm excited you're here, and really, again, I want to circle back to why you're here. Like, to me, folks like you, not Melinda, but you and April, like, you're giving a voice to people. And that's really powerful. And you're also coming on and you're educating us. And again, crossing that allowing, like, that humanizing, like, what is going on, and just better able to shape. In fact, I've like come away, even just reading this book on the psychology of Christian nationalism, I was like, oh, they actually have some pretty good recruitment tips, guys. But all that to say, I guess if you don't have words off the top of your head, I know I just put that on you.
No,
I
want
to say thank you.
you.
Okay, let me hear you.
For sure. Thank you for having me. My words, I think, to this audience would just be that we need all hands on deck. You don't push back against Christo-fascism by just having one or two leaders like say stuff from whatever you perceive to be a large platform. The change happens with who you know. It happens with who you're in conversation with. It happens with the work that you do on your own social media platforms. And so, I think that what happens is, and I struggle with this, I'm sure you do too, Lee, so you just feel like you're just such a little pebble. You're just such a little like dot on the spectrum of media and of influence, right? But I'm reminded of the words of Reverend Otis Moss III. He's an amazing pastor. His dad marched with MLK. His dad, Otis Moss, actually married MLK. And so he's one of the most like prolific leaders in the Black liberation movement. And he sent me this message that from what his dad used to say, that, our job is not to build the entire cathedral of liberation. Our job is to place our brick on that cathedral. That's our job, is to take your brick and to put it on that cathedral. And then you take your brick, Lee, and the people out there take their brick, and we keep building this house of liberation, So that's my encouragement. It's like, just keep going. I know it's discouraging. I know it feels like every day there's a new horror that we have to respond to or think about, and it just feels so crushing. That is a tactic of authoritarianism and fascism. I mean, Steve Bannon literally said, we're going to flood the zone with shit. This is intentional. So find moments of joy, touch grass. I mean that in the literal happy way, not as a pejorative. Like, spend time offline with your families. Raise radically empathetic, loving, inclusive children who are little rebels of love to fight fascism in the future. Like, do your part, and don't think that it's on you to save the world. It's not. We do it together.
That was fantastic. Well, folks, you heard it here. Tim Whitaker of Tim Whitaker Speaks is the direction he's heading in. If you want to know more about evangelical deconstruction, the New Evangelicals is that nonprofit that he accidentally started and taken off. Tim, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. We'll do it again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Folks, make sure to like, share, comment. What do you think? What'd you think? That's another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.